Alright, so in this particular video, what we are going to look at is APM mobile testing, and these are the most common interview questions. Kindly note that we will be trying to cover the concept perspective of these particular common interview questions, but mostly what the interviewer will be interested is whether you had a practical hands-on on APM or not. Okay, so what I will try to cover is the concept part of it, but at the end of this particular video, I will give you couple of links of YouTube course as such or YouTube video as such, which will give you an idea about the practical hands-on as well. Okay, this is a very good disclaimer because what the interviewer would want is whether the candidate has been really worked on APM or not. Okay, because APM is a tool, and that's why it is very important whether the candidate has really hands-on practically worked on the tool, and if he has encountered and how did he face those issues and resolve those issues while he was working on the practical hands-on. Nothing can beat a practical hands-on perspective. Of course, the concept is requires to be clear, but practical hands-on is very important whenever using the tool. Okay, that is what the interviewer will be expecting from the candidate as well. Enough of the disclaimer, let's proceed with the first question that might be coming as a common question. So what is a APM and why is it so popular? So kindly note when the interviewer is asking this particular question, what he will be looking forward is some of the keywords coming out. Okay, and what are the keywords is, let's proceed to understand. APM is one of the most widely used mobile testing tool in the market. Okay, so it covers the mobile app testing as well as mobile browser testing, although those kind of testing as such. So mobile testing tool is one of the keyword that we'll be looking into the interviewer question. It's a cross-platform tool. So what does it mean by the cross-platform tool? It works for iOS, it works for Android, it works for macOS as well. Okay, so it has a flexibility to perform different platforms or testing on different platforms as well as such. So this is what is mean by cross-platform tool. So this keyword can also be used to answer this question. Why is it popular and what is APM? It supports multiple languages. So what is meant by multiple languages? Multiple programming languages. So we can use Java, we can use C Sharp, we can use JavaScript, we can use Python, we can use Ruby as well to write scripts in APM as such. So that is also supported by APM, that is multiple language programming languages as such. It's supposed to test in simulators. So simulators are something as if there is no real device as such, but simulators are created so that the testing can be performed on those simulators. It supports emulators which is Android based as such, and it also supports physical real device. So it gives a flexibility to any automation tester to use either simulator, emulator, or even real devices can be connected to the machine, and we can use APM on that. It supports native, hybrid, and web. So you can understand that why, but the meaning of native is it has to be a downloadable app as such. So it APM can be used to test these particular native apps. It could be hybrid. Hybrid means you can get a combination of web and native. So web is a kind of a browser based. The customer doesn't have to specifically download app as such. So APM can be used to test these kind of applications as such, which is a quite flexible tool as such. And lastly, mobile applications are high in demand in today's world. As you can understand, most of the organizations, what they are doing is they are converting their web applications into downloadable apps, and APM is such a tool which can be used to test these kind of applications as such or apps as such. Now moving on to the next question, which might be a common question as well. Can you explain APM architecture in simple manner? Now, of course, this particular question, what the candidate can rely is to explain this in a pictorial and a simple manner, which is very understandable as such, which we'll be trying to understand in the answer. Now, APM architecture starts with a client. You can understand, as we spoke about, it supports different programming languages. It could be Java, it could be Python, it could be PHP, it could be C Sharp. and it could be JavaScript as well. Okay, or it could be Ruby. So whoever is an automation tester can have this flexibility to choose this particular programming languages, and this is set up as a APM client. Of course, APM client requires APM server. So automation tester has to make sure that the APM server is set up as such, and APM is running as a server already, so that the APM client can talk to APM server. And this is run via JSON wire protocol as such. You can see that the APM calls the APM server, which is already running, and APM server in turn calls the APM driver. So there has to be an APM driver if we have to use APM message. An APM driver is dependent on couple of operating systems, which is Android and iOS. So these are the most widely used mobile operating systems, as you can understand. It could be depending what the automation testers want to really test. Do they want to test in Android, or do they want to test in iOS phones as such? The APM driver in turn calls the emulator, simulator, or it could be physical device based on what the automation tester really wants to test it out. And in turn, what really happens is emulator, simulator, or a physical device responds back to the APM driver, and APM driver in turn responds back to the APM server, and APM server in turn responds back to the APM client. So this is a very good pictorial format which can be explained to the interviewer as such. As you can see that most the whole APM architecture comes into this one single page or one simple diagram, which can be explained through a diagram as such. Now let's proceed to the next question. What are desired capabilities in APM? Now this could be a common question as well, and without desired capabilities there won't be any APMs. Hence, this is kind of a valid question. What are desired capabilities in APM? Now, APM behaves differently for different operating systems of iOS and Android. So, desired capabilities is a method to distinguish the session request between the two operating systems. JSON objects, which is also referred as desired capabilities, helps in distinguish. Now you can understand there are some certain JSON objects which are to be entered in our scripts, so that it helps to distinguish different desired capabilities as such. And what are these JSON objects signify? It signifies and helps APM to understand what operating system it is. So we have already understood that there are different operating systems. So desired capabilities help to determine what operating system it is, what version of operating system it is, what device name, is it a physical emulator or simulator, what's the app name as such, etc. So desired capabilities in our APM scripts help to determine these kind of questions, so that APM can run and particularly choose the app as well as the mobile phone where it has to specifically test these. Now there could be a question, can you give some common parameters about desired capabilities? Now what I have done here, I have given a screenshot of the desired capabilities generally we see, and these parameters or these values will keep on changing based on the desired capabilities. Now, and as an example, what I've tried to depict over here is the desired capabilities where this is an iOS, it is a different version of iOS which is 11.1. There is a device name. So here we are, what we are trying to tell to APM is we are using an iPhone 8 Plus and the app name as such, and we are giving certain details of UDID as well as different parameters as such. So by this desired capabilities, APM would understand what exactly is answers to these kind of questions which we had tried to understand over here. Now apart from this, what are the commonly known parameters about desired capability? So what I have tried to list over here is some JSON objects which are very important. Without this, APM won't run at all. So you can see that there are different parameters like device name, UDID, platform name, platform version, automation name, app package, and app activity. So these are the common desired capabilities that we have to set up and we have to pass as an argument before we start the APM server as well. So what the interview will try to understand is, or have you used these parameters anytime before? Because without these parameters, APM server won't run at all. Now, what's a APM inspector? This is also a common question. Now, APM inspector is a GUI assistant tool which helps in inspecting the elements on the mobile app. It detects the different element properties which is suitable for the APM automation testing. You can see that this is how the APM inspector looks like. Now, this is a mobile app. This particular section, as you can see, this is a mobile app. The moment you clicked on a particular element, you can see that there is an app source, and within the app source there is a selected element. So we have clicked on a particular element and there is a selected element, and within the selected element you can get different properties of this element as such. So APM inspector helps to inspect particular elements on the mobile app, and it helps us to give the properties of these elements so that we can use into our automation scripts as such. So what would interviewer try to understand with this question is whether you have used APM inspector. And APM inspector of course is a very good tool to determine the element properties. So by that, have you practically used it, is what is interviewer trying to understand with this particular question. Now there is another question which can come: what are APM drivers and is it really important? Of course, it is very important, and let's try to understand this particular answer. Drivers are basically APM's answer to the question, how do we support automation of multiple unrelated platforms? So with the driver, we are trying to set up, or we are trying to use different platforms and those parameters as such. Now, if we look the official drivers which are supported by APM team as such, you can see depends upon different platforms. By the platforms, what I mean is there are different platforms like Mac OS, Windows, Linux, Android, and based on the platforms, as you can see, that different drivers are supported by APM team. So Chromium is supported by Mac OS, Windows, Linux. Something like UI Automated 2 is a driver which is supported by Android. XCUI test is supported for iOS platforms. So you can see that the APM team supports these official drivers, and these are required to run to use APM as such. Without these, APM cannot work. Now, interviewer might go into depth of it. He would try to understand how these drivers are really useful, but this particular pictorial diagram or the tabular format as such, this is very important to understand what all drivers are supported based on what platform you are using to test your application as such. Now this could be another common question: what are locator strategies in APM? Now those people who have used Selenium, they could understand that there are some locators for the element as such about in the application under test, and these locators have these strategies. Now class name, ID, name, XPath, and these are the common ones which are being also used in Selenium. But there are some additional locator strategies, which is accessibility ID, Android UI automator, iOS predicate string, iOS class chain. Now, if you capture these locators and use it in the automation scripts, it will be definitely helpful to proceed with your APM automation testing as such. And you can see that there is couple of things. One is a strategy, another is a selector. Now strategy is how to find an element, so you need to locate your element, and that's what is a strategy. And the selector is which element in particular to find. So which element is determined by selector. And when you write the script, locator strategy as well as selector comes into picture. Both have to be provided so that your automation scripts can be really working as such. So this can also be a common question based on whether the interviewer is really interested to know about the locator strategies, but this kind of gives an overall idea about what are strategies and what are selectors as such. Now, I have put a separate section called as tricky questions. Now, tricky questions can be related to mobile app as such. Tricky questions can be asked and it could be a yes no format, but we will have to understand why it is yes no and why it could be singular answer as such. Now, what's the port number of APM? Now, by this, interviewer wants to know what is the port is because when you practically use APM message, you have to make sure that you are using the correct port or what is the port that you are pointing to. So if you know the answer, what the answer is the port number 4723 is dedicated for the APM server or the default port as such. So when you run an APM server locally, this is the port that it will point to. The next question is, can you run APM test without physical mobile device? So as you know, APM, so the answer to this is yes, you can. So if you don't have a physical mobile device and the mobile device is very costly as such, you cannot afford to have iPhone or you cannot afford to have a costly Android phone, then too you can use emulators, simulators with APM as such. So your answer is yes, you can use APM without physical mobile device as such. The next question is, can the APM test work for Apple iPhones? And the answer to this is yes, you can use APM for iOS, Apple phones as such as well. The next question is, can the APM test work for Windows application? The answer to this is yes, you can. And the next question again is a tricky one. Do you need APM server to be created before you run your test? And the answer to this is yes, you need to set up APM server as such. If the APM server is not running, then you won't be able to point your APM scripts to the APM server and the scripts will fail as such. So you need to have a APM server set up and running as such so that your APM scripts can call this server. The next tricky question is, can you use APM without at least one driver? So the answer to this is no, you need to have drivers set up and installed before you use APM as such. So this is very important. The driver has to be set up, and by this, that interview would want to know if you have tried to practically set up APM as such. If you have not installed driver as such, with whether it would have run or not. So this is what are the tricky questions that might be thrown by the interviewer as such. Now again, this is a very common question is, what are the common errors encountered while setting up the APM tests or running APM server as such? So by this, what the interviewer wants to try to understand is, when you are trying to set up APM servers or APM tests as such, it would be that you will encounter issues. Nothing is smooth, or it would not be a smooth journey when you are trying to set up APM servers. When you are trying to run the server, you might get errors, and that's what he is trying to understand from this particular question. So what I've tried to list over here are some of the common exceptions that you get generally when you try to set up your APM server. Like for example, automation name can't be blank. So as I said, your desired capabilities all have to be there. If something is missed, you will be able to get this kind of error, which is automation name can't be blank. The another exception is neither Android underscore home or Android underscore SDK root environment variable was exported. So you have not set up the environment variables correctly. That could be the reason. The third exception which I have tried to list is could not connect to server. Are you sure it's running? If you are using the browser version, also ensure your APM server has been started with allow course. So this is a kind of a exception that generally people face when they are trying to set up the APM server. So what you need to do is, when you are running the APM server, you have to mention this as well, that is allow course, so that this error does not appear. You might encounter WebDriver exception, or you might encounter session not found exception as well, which is very common while setting up the APM server or APM server as such. So You can understand that the interviewer might ask these kind of questions as well, which are very common. But of course, as I mentioned, these are related to concepts as such. But in order to determine the exact practical hands-on, it is very important to understand how it's really set up through mobile phones or emulators as such. And what I have tried to do is I'll give the couple of links over here so that you can go to another videos that we have set up and you can follow it as a sequential step-by-step method in order to understand how it is practically set up as well, so that it can give you more insights going for an interview as such. Now, if you feel that there are some more questions that needs to be answered, or there are more common questions that can be asked as such, kindly add those into the comments so that the friend community members can also see those questions and it can help them in their automation testing journey as such. Kindly like, share, subscribe this channel to follow more, which will definitely help others.